Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents. Today, I am talking with David Heska Wanbli Weiden. David is an enrolled citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation, and he received his MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts. He was a McDowell Colony Fellow and a Tin House Scholar, and the recipient of the PEN America's Writing for Justice Fellowship. Winter Counts was nominated for an Edgar Award for Best First Novel. The book was a winner of the Anthony Thriller Lefty Barry McCavity Spur High Plains Electa Quinney and the Tilly Olson Awards. That's quite a list. And his story, Turning Heart, short story, appeared in the Best American Mystery and Suspense Stories in 2022. He is the series editor of The Native Edge, an imprint of the University of New Mexico Press, specializing in indigenous literature. Welcome, David.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here. Thank you so much. You got my nation pronounced correctly, and that is wonderful. That doesn't happen often, and
because you helped me.
Well, but you got it right. I often help people, and they still don't get it. So I'm honored. I'm honored and pleased that you did that. And thank you for the nice introduction. And I'll give you an exclusive here. I have not. This is the cover of Winter Counts in the Polish version.
Oh wow!
It just came out in Poland, and I have not yet shared this cover anywhere. So not on my socials, anywhere. So this is the very first look. I believe it means Winter Chronicles. I don't speak Polish, but I ran it through a translator, and I think that's the best that they could come up with. So anyway, there's the first look at the Polish version of the book.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, and I wanted just to read a couple of the reviews on the back of the book, because I mean, this book just gripped me, and I could not put it down. It's so good. Here's a gripping, richly textured thriller and an urgent dispatch from Indian country. Weiden, and now I said it right. Wrong?
You said it right.
Right, Weiden, because I've been saying it wrong for so long. Weiden writes with impressive authority and insight in this entirely original, enlightening, cliche-destroying novel. And that's exactly what I thought of it too. And another one is a stone-cold thriller with a soul and politics, compelling and complex. A gripping crime story perfectly married to bigger questions about race and place and American violence.
Well, I'm honored that you read those. The first one was from my friend Jim McLaughlin, and I had I didn't know him at the time he wrote this, but we met at the BoucherCon before the pandemic. I want to say 2019, so I met Jim there. He's a wonderful guy, and I had the honor of writing a blurb for his new book called Panther Gap, which is coming out, I think, from Flatiron soon. And so I just want to give a shout out to James McLaughlin. He did win the Edgar for Best First Novel in, I think, 18, and for Bearskin. And his new book, Panther Gap, is great. So it's not out yet, but it's coming. So keep an eye out for that one.
Well, definitely. So you are uniquely the perfect person to write about Virgil Wounded Horse, the main character, and he's the local enforcer of the Lakota Rosebud Reservation. So please tell readers about your background and the inspiration for this story.
Yeah, so I grew up in a rough neighborhood in Denver, Colorado called Swansea, Elyria. Now, my mother grew up on the reservation in South Dakota. So the Rosebud Sioux tribe, in English known as the Sichangu Lakota Oyate in our language, is in south central South Dakota. And so she grew up there. So I would spend a lot of time growing up. We would visit there for holidays. We would visit there in the summers. And so I spent a lot of time there, but I never lived full time on the reservation. So I always felt like an outsider to some degree there. And then I'd come back home and, I'd be the only native kid usually. So I felt like a little bit of an outsider at home as well, Denver, Colorado. But I grew up just obsessed by literature and books, as I suspect if you're watching this, you are as well. Okay. And, my parents were not wealthy. In fact, we struggled financially, but we had a bookmobile that would come to my elementary school, and I would just check out all sorts of genre books, whatever they had in there. Every Friday afternoon, I'd take a bunch. And so I grew up loving genre fiction, mysteries, spy thrillers, science fiction, you name it. I loved the written word. Now in college, I turned to more, I guess, what is called literary fiction. I don't believe in these labels, but they exist. And but then I came back to genre fiction later. So my background, again, I'm an enrolled citizen of the Sichangu Lakota Nation. I teach. I am a professor of Native American Studies here in Denver. I'm a lapsed lawyer. I call myself a lino, a lawyer in name only. I do have a law license, but I don't really practice anymore. I haven't practiced in a long time. I'm primarily just a teacher, and I teach in a couple of Master of Fine Arts programs around the country. And so I really enjoy, teaching creative writing and teaching Native American studies. So that's just a very quick snapshot of my background.
Yeah, and I guess I didn't realize that the Rosebud Nation is a real place.
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Yes,
I
indeed.
wasn't sure if it was fictional or not.
No, Rosebud is absolutely a real place. It's a large area. I've heard it said that it's as large as Delaware, the state of Delaware, and we're right next to the Pine Ridge Reservation for the Ogallala Lakota Nation. And so we are like cousins. We're both Lakota, but we're separate branches. And oh yes, yes. Now the thing is, the reason that I'm so thrilled to write about the Rosebud Reservation is because we're not as well known as Pine Ridge. Pine Ridge is quite well known because they have many famous leaders there. Crazy Horse, who everybody's heard of, was an Ogallala Lakota. Red Cloud, who's still somewhat well known. The Wounded Knee Memorial is there. So they have all of these fairly well-known markers or icons. We have fewer. Our great leader was a Sinte Gleshka, a Spotted Tail. And nobody really knows of him, but he was a really important leader as well. He was one of the first Native American leaders back in the 1800s to talk about education, which is obviously my passion. And he said education is the way for Native people to really succeed in this changing world. And he also was kind of a diplomat. He said, he took a trip to Washington and he saw the technology in the late 1800s that the Europeans had. And he's like, wow, listen, we need to work together and not necessarily fight. So anyway, so Spotted Tail was one of our great leaders, but not well known. I did write a children's book, a picture book on his life that is available online. Raycraft Books published it. I declined royalties on it. Instead, I distributed hundreds of copies of the book to every native Lakota school and library in the country. So I was really pleased to do that.
Oh,
Anyway,
that's great.
yeah, so Rosebud isn't very much a real place. We just don't get the attention that Pine Ridge does.
Right. Okay. Well, good. And so talk a little bit about Virgil Wounded Horse.
Sure.
He seems like a guy who never had any breaks. But boy, he got me right here, right away.
Well, let me, for those who have not read the book, let me explain a little bit about my protagonist, Virgil Wounded Horse. So Virgil is an Heska, which is a word in the Lakota language that means half-breed. And it's kind of a slur. It's not really a nice word. Don't use it if you're out visiting the reservation. Anybody who's watching this, it's not a word that you should use lightly. Okay. So he is a half-breed. He's Heska. And he lives on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota. And he is an enforcer, or better thought of as a vigilante. Now, we'll get into these, I think. Maybe we can get into some of the details later, but let me give the big picture now.
Sure.
Native nations, if folks watching this don't know, we are independent, separate countries. And I think people don't understand that at times. Native nations, as envisioned by the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, are considered to be separate nations within the boundaries of the United States.
Right.
Okay. However, the U.S. government and the Supreme Court have limited the independence of these native nations through a series of court rulings and laws over time. And so we are best described now as semi-sovereign or semi-independent. So we have some degree of independence and areas that were not independent. One of those areas that were not independent is criminal justice.
Mm-hmm.
If a felony crime happens on a reservation and the perpetrator and the offender are Native American, we cannot prosecute our own people. We have to call in the federal authorities, the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office, and they have sole and exclusive authority to punish and prosecute felony crimes on the reservation.
Or not.
Or not. That's what I'm, yeah. And that is really the crux of the book. We know from the FBI's own numbers that it varies from year to year, but in a typical year, anywhere from 25 to 40% of felony crimes are declined by the FBI. They say we're not going to prosecute these. And so you've got somebody sitting in jail over here for child abuse, and he's set free. So where Virgil Wounded Horse comes in, he is a vigilante. A family of an injured child, if they can't get justice from the U.S. government, they're going to call Virgil, or probably wouldn't call him, but they put the word out to him and say, hey, we want you to go get some street justice on this guy that hurt our little girl. Yeah. And his price is $100 for each tooth he knocks out, each bone he breaks, and each black eye he gives. Now, the question I often, so that's Virgil Wounded Horse. He's a professional vigilante on the reservation, meting out justice when the government won't do it. Now, the question I often get is, are there really vigilantes on the reservations?
I was going to ask.
You were going to ask, but I've anticipated the answer is yes, there are. They're not they're not well publicized. I've said this before in other interviews. There's not a website, so like there is, like to get your teeth cleaned or something. You can't book like a beating, at 3:30 on Friday. Okay, it's done. It's done very much
quietly,
underground and quietly. So anyway, in a nutshell, that is Virgil Wounded Horse. He is a vigilante, but he is also taking care of his 14-year-old nephew Nathan. So Virgil's sister, Sybil, died in a tragic car crash, and so he became the guardian of Nathan. And so he's also kind of trying to be a father figure here. So there are a lot of dynamics. Virgil is struggling with his identity as an Heska. He's struggling with being a vigilante, and he's struggling to raise his nephew.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, I kind of loved what he did, even though, it sounds like something really bad, but I loved that he was taking care of business for people. And Marie Shortbear is a stabilizing force in his life, even though they dated and are not really dating now. But she's almost like overly willing to help him. Let's talk about her a little bit.
So Marie Shortbear, it was one of my favorite characters to write, and also the one that I struggled with the most. So Marie Shortbear is Native, but she's not full Lakota. Her mother is from a different Native nation. Okay, so she is something of an Heska as well. Okay, now she and Virgil dated, but then they broke up because Virgil in the past had a substance problem. He drank too much, but he quit that. Virgil does not take a drink in the book. He's tempted, but he never takes a drink. But in his bad days, he said a nasty thing to Marie. They broke up, and so Marie is his ex-girlfriend. But then something happens in the book. I won't do any spoilers here. And Marie comes back into Virgil's life, and obviously you can guess that sparks start to fly again. But about Marie Shortbear, so her father is a tribal councilman, so very powerful, and they have some money. So Marie is also torn between two worlds. Her sister went to Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, and Marie herself was accepted to Dartmouth College, but she chose to stay on the reservation and study at our local tribal college, St. Igleshka University. So she is struggling between, being a traditionalist, or tradish as we call it on the res, and maybe assimilating to European ways. So she's struggling with that herself. Now, what's interesting here is I wrote this book now, I guess 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, early drafts of it 5 years ago. And I brought in Dartmouth College. Dartmouth College is in Hanover, New Hampshire. And if you're Native and you want to go to an Ivy League school, that's typically where you go. And if you have the grades. So interestingly enough, what's happened is sometimes art imitates life in that. So my son, David Jr., upon whom Nathan is somewhat based, he's a high school senior.
Mhm.
And so he just went through all of this college application process. And indeed, he has been accepted to Dartmouth College and is committed to go there. so
Wow, that's kind of
so
cool though.
oh well, he's thrilled. I'm a little sad about my firstborn. I've got one other son who's 2 years behind him, but it's weird.
Going so
Uh,
far away.
yeah, going so far away, but he's happy. But it's just odd how, when I wrote this, my son was like 12 or 13. I didn't have any idea that this was going to happen. But anyway, so Marie declined Dartmouth College. David
Yeah.
did not. And but Marie has her own arc. When I first wrote the character of Marie, I didn't feel she was very well defined. So I really took her back to the drawing board and I tried to give her own quirks and her own narrative arc within the book. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, no, that's cool. And you know what? I didn't, send you this question, but I thought it was really interesting how you used her to bring in the discussion of food and nutrition on the reservation, which really doesn't have anything to do with the mystery or the crime. But I thought it was a really interesting discussion that you had there.
Yeah, so what I tried to do is, again, I don't want to give away too many spoilers, but this is one I think I can give away here. There is a subplot and a sort of a sub theme within the book of indigenous food sovereignty. Okay, so if I'm guessing that folks watching this may not know, or they probably have guessed, that getting decent and healthy food on a reservation is problematic. So the Rosebud Reservation is this huge plot of land, and we have exactly two grocery stores. If you live on the edges of the reservation, you're elderly, an elder, maybe you don't have a car, you have to rely upon these little corner stores, convenience stores, or commodity food boxes that you can go pick up. And the food in the commodity boxes are terrible usually and unhealthy. They're trying to make it better. And so there's a problem with getting healthy and sustainable food on
Right.
reservations. But at the same time, there's this new food movement happening in restaurants around the country. So now indigenous food is starting to become a big thing. Again, I wrote this about 4 or 5 years ago, and now it's exploding. I just went over in September. I was at the BoucherCon conference in Minneapolis, and I went to Owamni Restaurant, which is an indigenous restaurant that was just voted by the James Beard Foundation as the best new restaurant in the country. So again,
Wow.
something, yeah, that I wrote about 5 years ago, it's now happening.
Yeah.
But I used Marie to bring this in because I thought it was an important and fun topic. It doesn't completely tie in with the main plot,
Right.
but I wanted the book to have, some little alleyways and meanderings that didn't necessarily all contribute to the plot,
Right.
you know,
Well,
and that
and
was
that's
a,
what makes it interesting too,
hopefully. Yeah. But I'll just briefly say the problem with this new indigenous food movement is that, look, I loved Awamni and I had a great meal there, but it was pricey, and an average family on the reservation is not going to be able to go able and drop $200 or $300 on a meal,
Yeah. Why?
and
Because it's
indigenous
trendy and
trendy
popular
and
now. And
expensive, and a lot of that food that the proponents, like, they say you need to give up wheat and sugar. Any food that didn't exist, that was brought over from Europe, they say you need to get rid of. So no beef, okay, just eat bison. No wheat, no sugar, okay? All of this, and go out and forage for native herbs, that's all great. But if you're a family of five trying to make it
right,
on the reservation, you don't have, you're just trying to keep your family fed.
right, you're
And
not
so I think there's a
foraging.
tension. There's a tension here. Anyway, so
Yeah.
I address that in the book, and I don't necessarily answer the question. I just present the issue.
Yeah. No, I thought it was really well done. And then so let's talk a little bit about when Virgil's nephew Nathan he's a 14-year-old kid, and my computer's doing something weird. Hold on one second. There. I'm sorry. He overdoses on heroin, and so this ramps up the tension with our hero, like, dynamically.
Yes.
And hardcore addiction has become, practically the norm, I've heard, on rural areas in the country, and also it can be even worse in Native American communities. Do you mind talking about that a little?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, yeah, so the landscape of drug addiction has shifted across this country just in the 4 or 5 years since I wrote this book.
Yeah.
I don't pretend to be an expert on this. I really rely upon this wonderful writer, Sam Quinones, who's really a wonderful journalist. What's his book? I think it's called Dreamland, and then he's got a new one that's out. And just in 4 or 5 years, things have changed. So across the country, fentanyl is the big new problem. It has come, obviously, I mean, it has swept the nation, and it's really dangerous.
Right.
Here in Colorado, just about 6 months ago, we had a group of 5 people. They bought what they thought was some cocaine at a nightclub or something. And so they sat around and
Right.
they snorted lines of cocaine, and they all died within 30 seconds.
Because it was fentanyl.
Because there was fentanyl, massive amounts of fentanyl in the cocaine, or what they thought was cocaine. Here's a baby crying in the next room. And so, the sister-in-law comes in the next day. She sees 5 people, lying dead, a baby crying. It's horrifying what is happening here. Now, that is the big problem nationally. It's becoming more of a problem on the res, to my understanding. The biggest problem that as I understand it, still on the res, is actually methamphetamine. Because it's easy to make, and it can be brought in local. You can cook it yourself, and that's still a huge problem on many, if not most, reservations. Heroin, which is what this book is largely about, continues to be a problem, but that maybe has declined with the new fentanyl uptick. So there are problems, just as there are in every community around the country. There are absolutely problems on the reservation, and this book has a very strong anti-drug message.
Yeah, very strong, and that I really appreciate that too. And I don't know if I'm in Wisconsin, and so I've learned a little bit about the reservations in northern Wisconsin too, and the same is the issue. Gangs come up from Chicago and try and convert the kids, and it's really tragic what's happening, I think.
Yes, absolutely.
So, but Virgil steps into the problem, and he's looking for the guy who's dealing.
Right. Yeah. So the way the book, again, I'll keep this as generic as I can for those who haven't read and want to be surprised.
Right.
But yeah, so Nathan overdoses. Virgil had previously been approached and says, "Hey, I want you to stop heroin from coming onto the res. You're such a big tough guy, vigilante." Virgil says, "No, I don't do that. That's not my thing. I'm not going to do it." So classic, if you study the hero's journey, this is like the refusal of the call,
Right.
Bringing a little writings talk here, so Virgil refuses it, but then he comes home and he discovers that his beloved nephew, Nathan, is literally overdosing right there. And so then he changes his mind. He's like, yeah, I'll go after them. So that is what kind of spurs him. And then we're sort of kicked into Act 2 of the book, which is Virgil's struggle to find the person that is helping to bring heroin to the reservation.
Yeah. And I understand you're not wanting to give too much more away of the book. So I'm going to skip over my next question.
Sure.
Sorry, viewers. But you also highlight some of the difficulty of the chain of command when it comes to, fighting crime in Native American communities. And like you said earlier, a lot of people don't realize that, the state law enforcement has no jurisdiction unless it's a murder or a bigger crime.
Yes and no. So we could do a whole seminar on criminal justice in Indian country and how it works. It's actually fantastically complicated. Okay, so the way it works is for felony crimes that occur on reservations, the federal government has jurisdiction, including murder. So they have sole jurisdiction, but it's more complicated than that. So a lot depends who the victim is and who the perpetrator is, and where the crime occurred. Okay, so literally, if a murder occurs 3 feet over the reservation line, that changes everything. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and that's the same with like county jurisdiction and other. Sure. Yeah.
So it's very, very complicated, but making it even more complicated is there are a number of federal laws. Well, one big federal law, the Major Crimes Act, which has existed since the mid 1800s, which I've already talked about, that the federal government has sole jurisdiction over felony crimes, but the state has jurisdiction over misdemeanors and some lesser felony crimes.
Right.
So it's complicated. And then there's a whole other law called Public Law 280 that I'm not even going to get into here. So the whole thing is that it's very, very difficult to prosecute crimes that occur on native lands, on
Right.
reservations. But having said that, one of the questions that I often get is, they say, "Hey, Dave, explain to us, why is the federal government declining all of these prosecutions? Why are they declining these cases? We don't understand that. I mean, here in Denver, Colorado, if the feds or the state police declined 30% of child abuse cases, there'd be protests in the streets."
Right.
Well, it's a complicated thing. And I once had an FBI agent at a speech I was giving disagree with me, but we talked it through. I was on the stage, he's in the audience, and he came to see my point of view. But I'll say this: the federal government, in my view only here, is underfunding criminal justice enforcement on reservations. For example, in South Dakota, I was told there are exactly 2 FBI officers that are responsible for all of the felony crimes that occur on all of the reservations in South Dakota. 2.
Wow.
Just 2. Okay, so they are overbooked. And so if you just have a run-of-the-mill child abuse case, they probably don't have time for that. They're going to focus on drugs or murders or something like that. And it gets even worse. Of the 2 agents that are assigned to South Dakota, I was told that they get cycled in and out. So in other words, a new agent comes every 2 or 4 years, and they don't know the culture, they don't know the people, so they don't have something called institutional memory. And so they have to learn, how to interact with Native people, learn who the players are, and the people may not trust them. So you see, there's a real problem here that I think could easily be solved. Let's get more FBI agents on Native lands to prosecute these crimes, and let's give them a period of service that are longer than 2 years. So this is
Right.
Again, it's a complicated topic, but that's one quick take on it.
Yeah, no, I understand. And so for authors that are trying to write any like Native American characters or crimes or anything like that into their books, what would you suggest? What resources would you suggest for them?
Yeah, well, I think, the first thing to realize is there are nearly 600 Native nations within the boundaries of the United States. And that doesn't even count for what we call state-recognized tribes or unrecognized Native nations. And so there's not just one Native American perspective. Right. Like I'm only really learned in Lakota, and even among the Lakota people, we have 7 branches, 7 bands. Yeah. And then we have Dakota people, Nakota people. So don't think that there's like this one pan-Indian experience. Yeah. If you're going to bring in a Native American character, you need to become learned in that character's specific nation.
Right.
All right. And so, you have to do the research. I would go to, the website for that nation. I would learn as much as I can. But I mean, the key thing is, if you're going to bring in a Native character as a side character, do the research. Don't write into the stereotypes, obviously. Now, if you're non-Native and you're writing a main character, a protagonist that's Native, that's a decision you need to take. You need to think about really carefully. Okay. Yeah. I'm not the writing police. Whenever I speak, I do a lot of conferences, and 90% of the time somebody comes up to me and they ask my permission to write about a Native character as their protagonist. And I'm like, hey, look, you write what you want. I'm not the, again, the police here, right. But I do say that it's a decision you need to think about carefully, because you're not going to have the cultural competence usually to write, I think, accurately and sympathetically about that character. So you need to think carefully about why you're making that decision and make sure you do the research.
Right. No, and I'm glad you said that, because I took the classes up in Appleton. There was a focus. Part of that conference was focused on Native law and law enforcement. Yeah. And people were asking me, "Oh, what did you learn there?" Because I was thinking about putting Native people in my book, and people not from Wisconsin, and I'm like, I can't help you. You need to research that. And I think that's really important for other authors to know, that they need to dive into that wherever their crime is.
But I do just want to follow up on that. I'm not one of these people that say if you're non-Native you should never write any Native character ever. I'm not in that camp. Look, some of my native fellow writers are. They think that you should not. They say just write what you know. I don't necessarily agree with that. Okay.
Right.
I'm of the belief that people can follow the muse, but you don't want to write something that's offensive or uninformed or
Yeah.
disrespectful.
Do you know of
So
any good resources though for writers? Because I know that some people have told me they've had trouble locating any information in their particular state or whatever. I mean, maybe it's different state to state, but do you know of any good resources for authors?
well, I don't know for authors specifically, but I make my students in my Native American Studies classes write a paper on a native nation, and they say that as well. It's like, well, Professor Wyden, how do I find out about this? And step one is to go to the website. Nearly every nation will have its own website, and you can go there. But then there are some native websites that are news aggregators. Indian Country Today, Indians, that's Indian Z, Indians.com. That I think that's still working. And so there are a couple of these that they collect news that deal with natives from around the country, and that's a good place to start as well. So
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really great information. Thanks for
yeah,
that.
sure,
Um, so back to Winter Council.
sure.
Um, why did you decide on the title Winter Counts, and can you explain what that means?
Oh, I'd love to. So a winter count is a calendar that was created by the Lakota people before the advent of the Europeans. So winter counts were how we kept track of the years, and it operated on a different concept from what is our calendar called? Is it the Gregorian calendar? I think that's right. I'm not
Yeah,
100% sure.
I think
I
so.
don't know. I think that's right. But it's based upon a different idea, and that is to use one event as the central event of the year. So, and they would do like little pictographs or pictures to like maybe there was a year of a great buffalo hunt, okay, hundreds of years ago, and so there'd be little pictographs of, the people like really getting a lot of buffalo so they could make it through the winter. So in other words, one event would capture the entire year. So it would be the year of the great buffalo hunt. So that is how Lakota people kept a track of the years. So it's a different system. And now we don't do that anymore. Now, so obviously, but I loved this idea. And in the book, Virgil and he has a flashback, and his sister Sybil, they made little winter counts as kids. I have a little flashback on that. And so I love that. And obviously there's a double meaning to the title because winter is exceptionally difficult in South Dakota right now, more than ever. If you don't know, I think you guys must have gotten hit as bad as anybody else if you're up in Wisconsin, but South Dakota got hit very hard by this snowstorm. And I believe 13 people died up there just a week ago. They went in, they found an elderly man frozen stiff in there, and a 12-year-old boy died because the snow was so high they couldn't get out and get his medicine. And they asked for reinforcements from the governor of the state, but she wouldn't provide it for 2 weeks. And so a lot of people died up there.
That's awful.
Yeah, people don't know we don't have central heating. Most houses up there rely upon propane or firewood, so you have to get a propane delivery, and if you run out of the tank, you're in
Propane.
trouble up there.
Wow.
So obviously, I meant the title to refer to the brutality of winter in South Dakota. Not, I'm sorry that this season has been so rough, and I hear they have a storm up there right now as well. So it's
Yeah.
very, very rough.
No, and I'm in southern Wisconsin, so we're not getting hit like that.
Oh, okay.
So, but yeah, I know a lot of the people in the country all over are
Yeah.
getting buried.
Yes.
Yeah. So no, I'm sorry to hear that. You said you've planned this as a series, so you have another book coming out. And before we get to that, though, you've also written short stories, and you have a volume called From the Akashic, titled is it Akashic publisher?
Yes.
Okay, titled Native Noir.
It's not out yet, and there's not
not.
actually been a formal announcement, but by now the news has leaked out enough. So if folks don't know the Akashic series, they have 90 volumes. Akashic Books in New York is one of the great crime publishers. They publish other stuff than crime too, but they have 90 volumes, like New York City noir. Um, there may be a Milwaukee noir. I'm not sure. A Chicago noir.
Oh yeah, yeah, there is. Yep, yep.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And so what they do is they take crime writers from a particular city, and then non-crime writers, people that don't typically write crime, and they all write sort of dark, crimey noir stories. And they've been doing this for what, over a decade, and they have 90
Yeah.
volumes. So they approached me about a year ago and said, Dave, we want to do a volume not necessarily tied to a city, but tied to native people. And would you be willing to edit it? And I said, sure. And I'm going to throw in a story myself as well. So this is not out yet, but native noir, there are a lot of really great writers. I guess I can mention some of them. Brandon Hobson, who was nominated for the National Book Award a few years ago. Marcy Rendon, who's a great native crime writer. So I've assembled some of the best Indigenous writers in the U.S. and Canada, and they're all writing crime stories. So I'm excited about that. So I'm editing that volume, and then I
Awesome.
have a whole bunch of short stories that have come out. If people really like Virgil Wounded Horse and they want to see what happens to him next, let's see. I've written so many, I'm forgetting. I do believe you were kind enough to mention this. I believe the one that is in Best American Short Story, Mystery and Suspense Stories, Turning Heart. This updates what happened to Virgil after the events of Winter Counts.
Okay.
So the story in here is sort of what he's doing. It takes place like 6 months after Winter Counts ends. And then I've got another Virgil story in a book called Midnight Hour. Yes, I've got a Virgil story in Midnight Hour. That was a lot of fun. And then I've got some new characters in a volume called The Perfect Crime, and that just came out this year, and Denver Noir. So Denver Noir is another book that's out now,
Oh,
and
by
that's
the
a brand
same Akashic.
exactly
Yep.
Akashic. Yeah, yeah, and that's a completely new character set in Denver. A down on his luck Native American attorney. I had a lot of fun with that one. So yeah, so I love short stories, but I'm done with them for a while because I'm deeply in the writing of the sequel.
Well, good, because we can't wait.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So tell our viewers where they can find you, and if they want to reach out, how to connect with you.
Sure. So I'm on all of the social media platforms except for TikTok. I maybe someday but you can find me on Twitter at Wanbli Weiden. Well, a good place to start is my website. It's davidweiden.com. So davidweiden.com. And there I've got a Facebook page listed, my Twitter. I'm on the Instagram. I love that a lot. That is kind of
I like
rapidly
Instagram.
become my favorite platform because
Yeah.
it's just really fun, and everybody seems to be in a good mood there. Now,
Yeah.
interestingly enough, I post stuff up there. Nobody really cares much about it. It's okay. Maybe I get a few likes, 50 or something. But my son, now my younger son, he does this thing called speed cubing. Do you remember Rubik's cubes from
Yeah.
back in the day?
Yeah.
So there's a whole subculture of people that do this, at mainly young people. They go to tournaments, they compete. And so he loves it. There are like hundreds of thousands of people that do this. It's a whole subculture across the world. I'm not kidding. So he does
Wow.
this. He has a lot of fun. I'm going to bring this back to Instagram, I promise. So he's actually ranked 50th in the world. He can take a Rubik's Cube and he can solve it in about 4 seconds,
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, because he has to memorize,
The
hundreds
pattern.
of patterns and algorithms. So he it's fun for him. He's 15, he goes to these tournaments. So he took a video of himself solving one at a tournament and he posted it, and he gets 28,000 likes. you know the most I've ever gotten is like 70 or something. And I'm like, oh, okay, so that's how I get some attention on social media. I just have to learn how to solve a Rubik's cube,
In 4 seconds.
in 4 seconds. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah. So he's eclipsed me. So it was quite the humbling experience. But of course, I'm proud of him. He's having a lot of fun. So,
Yeah. No, that's great. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And it's been really great talking to you.
likewise, it was my honor to be here. Thank you guys. The next book is called Wisdom Corner. It's coming. I get emails all the time saying, Dave, please, we
Is
want
there a
the next
date? Is
book."
there a date?
Not yet. We're hoping for 2023, but I think we all know here it takes a while to design a book and copy edit it and all this other stuff. But I just want to say, an honor to be here. I have a newsletter that I put out very, very
Oh, yeah.
seldomly, sign up for that. And I do teach at not just MFA programs, but I teach at a number of seminars and stuff around the country. So I teach plot, dialogue, stuff like that. And so I'm always honored to help out emerging writers. So it was really, really a pleasure to be here today.
Great. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
All right.
Bye,
Bye.
everybody.